Today I'm going to be setting up Gitea. This is a GitHub or GitLab alternative that can be self-hosted. If you're starting to learn how to use Git, this is a great tool. If you want to see how I do this, come check it out. So if you're anything like me and you're just learning how to use Git, having a self-hosted Git server is kind of a benefit over GitHub or GitLab. There are ways of making your Git repositories private on GitLab and GitHub, but a self-hosted Git server is more secure than using GitHub or GitLab when you don't really know how to use it. So that's where Gitea shines for me. I personally use Gitea for backing up my notes, for version controlling my Docker Compose files, which may not have the best security practices. I'm talking about having plain text passwords and API keys. And I also use Gitea for archiving public repositories for programs or apps that I personally use, just in case the repository disappears. It's definitely overkill, and I know I'm putting on my tinfoil hat as I speak, but that's what I use it for. And what's amazing about Gitea is their documentation. It is top tier. So if you go to the Gitea website, under resources, documentation, they have a whole bunch of ways of installing Gitea. And I'm going to go through three ways. I'm going to go through from binary, I'm going to go through from package, and I'm going to go through Docker, and not necessarily in that order. And in order for me to do that, I've gone into my Proxmox and I've created a virtual machine. Now you can see here I'm on the snapshots page just so that I can go back to a fresh install, so that I can go through the installation process twice with the virtual machine. And I'm going to start with installation from package. The reason you might want to install from package is that way your package manager will update Gitea with the rest of the packages anytime you do a system update. The problem with packages is that there's only one official package, and that's for macOS. Since I'm installing this on Debian, I'm going to have to use an unofficial package. Now if I scroll down here, there is a snap package that is unofficial. It probably will be mostly good, but because this is a isolated app from the rest of the system, it says here some functions may not work. I have never tested this out. I don't know how good it works. I don't know if there actually are any limitations, but because there might be, I'm going to go with a Debian repository. So if I scroll down to the bottom here, under Awesome Gitea, there is right here a Debian official package. It's really simple to install. You just follow the directions right here. I'm going to SSH into my VM, and I'm going to copy and paste those commands. So this command here just added a GPG key. This command added the third-party repository, and now I need to update the repositories. And this will install Gitea and the keyring for that repository. So that's pretty much it. Gitea is installed, but I need to start the service, so I'm going to run sudo systemctl enable gitea.service. Oh, and I want to add now on there so that it will start it immediately. And that's it. Gitea is running. Now that I've switched over to my browser, I'm going to navigate to the IP address of my virtual machine, and I'm going to use port 3000 because that's what Gitea runs on. And you can see here, this is the initial startup page. If you have a database set up, you'll want to plug in the values here, which you're going to see in the next install. But since I didn't put one on here, I'm just going to use SQLite. And the rest of this, you can change the site title, but you don't really want to change your repository root path or any of the other settings. It's basically good to go. So I'm going to click Install Gitea, and this will finalize the installation process. And now Gitea is running. You can register an account and get started. I've rolled back my virtual machine, so I've got a fresh install of Debian again, and I'll go over installing from binary. Now, there's two main reasons why you might want to install from binary. The first one is that you always know you're getting the official software. There's no third parties to tamper with anything. The second, and this is a big one, is that if there are any breaking changes, you can do an update of your system using the package manager without necessarily breaking Gitea. Updates this way are a little more manual and they'll take a few more steps. But if there are any breaking changes in Gitea, you can go through the documentation and see before you update anything. So with this installation, I'm going to start by preparing a database. The last install we used SQLite. This time we're going to use MariaDB. If you want to use MariaDB with the package install, you're going to have to go through these exact same steps. The documentation is really clear on how to use MySQL, and it's also got all the steps you need for Postgres. I'm going to use MariaDB because I've used it before and I'm kind of familiar with it. And I'm going to sudo apt install MariaDB server. So in order to set us up with the most secure starting point, I'm going to run sudo MySQL secure installation. And since there is no password on here yet, I just hit enter, switch to unit socket, change the root password, give it something secure. Remove anonymous users, disallow root login remotely, remove test database, and reload privilege tables. So MariaDB is now ready to use, and I've switched back to the browser. On here, we've got a whole bunch of steps that you can go through. The first step here is for a remote database, but since this is all running local, we can just skip to step 2. And this step just logs us into MariaDB. So back here on the terminal, just paste that command. Give it the password that you ran during the secure install script. And now that we're in, we can set up our database. Now that's a command I'm not too familiar with, but looking at it, I would guess it gets rid of any old passwords. Now this command, there's a couple things to be aware of. Between the brackets over here, this is your Gitea user. You can name it whatever you want, but you're going to have to remember that for the setup later. And at the end here, between these two are your password. I'm going to leave this as Gitea user and password just for demonstration so that you understand what they are. But obviously, if you're installing this as your own server, you want to give this a secure password. You want to give it something better than this. Now this line is going to give you your database. This here is going to be the name of your database. So you can name this whatever you want. Gitea database name. And then it's going to have some settings for character set on here that I'm not qualified to tell you about. Now this command, because I changed what the database name is, I'm going to have to change it on here. And because I changed the Gitea user, I got to change this as well. And then flushing privileges on here just enables these changes. So I'm done with this, and now you can go through the installation of binary on here. This is fairly simple, but there's a few more steps involved than doing the package. So we'll just copy these commands, we'll paste them on here. This will download the binary file and make it executable. So if I list here, I've got the Gitea binary and it's now executable. Now with that Gitea binary downloaded, there's a few things we have to set up on the system outside of the database. Number one, we want to install Git. With Git installed, we have to add a user that Git is going to run under. And to do that, we use sudo add user Git. Give it a super secure password. You don't have to enter any of this stuff. And that should have created a home directory for Git. So I'm going to list the home directory. And you can see the Git user does have a directory now. Now we got to create a directory structure for Gitea to use. And we'll use this command here. It will create under the varlib directory a Gitea with 3 subdirectories, custom data, and log. And I need to sudo that, of course. We have to change it so it's owned by Git with sudo, of course. We have to change the permissives. Then we have to create a settings directory in Etsy. Change the ownership and temporarily change the permissives. Now we copy the Gitea binary to a directory in the path. And to create a service file so that Gitea will automatically start on boot, we need to wget with an output file of Etsy systemd system gitea.service service from this URL. Oh, and again, sudo. Now we do have to make some changes from this service file, so I'm going to use vim sudo, I'll remember it this time, Etsy systemd system Gitea. Now inside this file, because we're using MariaDB, we want to make sure that those comments are removed. This will make sure that MariaDB is up and running before it starts up Gitea. So I'm going to write and quit, and now everything is ready to go. I'm going to run sudo systemctl daemon reload, and this will have systemd checked for system files. And now we can start that Gitea service. Gitea is now running on this virtual machine. So I've switched over to my browser. We'll go back to that IP address. Of course, it's running on port 3000. This time, because we set up a database, we've got a few more settings that we have to change. If you look under here, MySQL is the same as MariaDB. Well, remember I changed the username to Gitea user. We have that super secure password, and the database name I called db name. Since these are the directories that we set up for operating, you don't really want to change any of that stuff. If you're using a reverse proxy, you will want to change this domain to the domain that you've set up the reverse proxy to. But this is good enough for me for right now, so I'm going to click Install Gitea. With that, Gitea is ready to use. You can register an account and start using. Now I'm going to install Gitea in its final form, for my home lab at least, and that's with a rootless Docker install. So in order to do that, I'm going to SSH into my Docker virtual machine. Now that I'm connected to my Docker virtual machine, I'm just going to switch to the directory I'm going to be working in, which is my apps directory. And in here, I'm just going to create another directory for Gitea. So I'll change into that one. And then inside the Gitea directory, I need to create 2 more directories. and they are data and config. This is for Gitea to use for its persistent storage. And you can see they're both owned by my user at the moment. I need to change that so that it's owned by Git, but I haven't created a Git user on here yet. And unlike the last install, I don't need to create a home directory for it, so I'm going to use this time user add git. Oh, but I need to use sudo again. And if I check id-u, my Git user has been created. Now inside this directory, I want to create a compose file. So I'm just going to paste the compose from the Gitea website. And I don't need the version number at the top. And you'll notice this time I'm using the Postgres database because for some reason when I tried to do this before I started recording, the MySQL one wouldn't work. So I'm just going to leave all the settings just as is for this demo. But if this is something that you wanted to be a more secure installation, obviously you might want to change the database name, user, and password so that it's not something so obvious. But for now, I'm just going to write and quit this. And I also need to change the ownership of those two directories I created before. I want them to be owned by Git. Config and data. Now this should be ready to go, so I'm going to say docker compose up -d. Now before I do the final installation, there's a couple of things that I should change first. Now in order to use the SSH features of Gitea, there's a couple more steps that you have to do. We need to create a file, and I'll need sudo for this, at user local bin they called Gitea shell. In here we just add these two lines, and what it'll do is it will exec into the Gitea container anytime we SSH into the Git user. So on here, this Gitea is the name of the container that's running Gitea. If you change that for any reason in the Docker Compose, you'll have to change it in here as well. So this is ready to go, and I need to give it executable permissions. So sudo chmod +x. So I copied this command from the Gitea install page, and what it's going to do is set the Git shell to this script that we just did in the last step. So anytime anyone logs into the Git user on this virtual machine, it's going to give you access to the shell inside the container. Now the last step is to make a change to the SSH config. So to do that, we go sudo vim etc ssh sshd config. So in here we'll go to the bottom and we'll paste in these three lines. And what it's going to do is tell the SSH daemon that for the Git user to grab the authorized keys from within the container. And that's all we need to do. So I'm going to write and quit. And now we just have to restart the SSH daemon. Now it all should be ready to go. So I switched over to my browser. We're going to locate that IP address. That was 240.162, and we're going to go to port 3000. So in here, everything should already be set for you. If you want, you can change the title. The only thing I'm going to change on here is the base URL, because I'm going to be setting this up through my reverse proxy. So in here, I'm going to say HTTPS, and that'll be Gitea at hardwoodhomelab.demo.xyz. And then install Gitea. So for whatever reason, I needed to reload the page and click install again for it to actually work. But it worked this time, and this is what you'll see once you're booted up. The domain that I had showed setting up in the install process got wiped, so I'm going to have to set that up again. But once you've got it installed, this is what you're going to see. You're going to have to register an account. I'll enter in all this information at home.local, and then give yourself a password and register an account. Since I messed up the original install script, in order to change the base URL, I'm going to need to change the config files for Gitea. So the first thing I'm going to do is shut it down. I'm going to use docker compose down within the Gitea directory here. And inside, I'm going to go to the config directory. In here, there should be a config file. And I'm going to check the ownership on this. Oh. So that's owned by me. I don't need to sudo it. Now in here, there should be a root URL, and you can see it right here. So I'm going to get rid of all of this, and I'm going to replace it with my domain, which I called gitea.hardwoodhomelabdemo.xyz. And that should be good. So I'm going to save that and exit. I'm going to start up Gitea again using docker compose up-d again. This should grab the new configuration. And then I switched back to my browser, and I'm going to try that new URL. There we go. I did have to set up a DNS entry and a host entry in Nginx Proxy Manager before I started this up, but it looks like it's working now. I'm going to try signing in. And it's still working. Perfect. The first thing I would do is set up an SSH key. So I'd go to Profile, Settings, and right here, SSH, you want to add your key here. So I'm going to call this Hardwood Home Lab Laptop. And you just paste your key in here, add key. Now that we're ready to start using this, I'm going to create a new repository. So I'm going to go home, add a new repository. I'm just going to call this one Hardwood Home Lab Demo. I'm going to initialize the repository, so it's going to create a README file, and it's just going to have the repository name in the markdown file. So we'll create repository. And now that that's created, I'm going to copy this SSH command, and I'm going to pull it to my laptop here. So now I'm on a terminal on my laptop, and I'm just going to create a directory here called git. I'll go in there, and you'll see there's nothing in here. I'll use the command git clone, and I'll paste that link that was given to me from the Gitea website. Right, since I did this before, I've got an SSH key for the old demo. So I'm going to copy this command, I'll paste it in here. That'll get rid of that old key, and I'll try this again. And that pulled the repository, so you'll see I have that demo there. I'm going to change into that directory, if I can type. And I'm going to make a modification to that README file. Oops. So I'll just add a line or two in here. And I'm going to add that to my repository. I'll commit it, and then I'm going to push that back up if I can. Oops. Git push. So that looks like it worked. I've switched back to my browser here, and those changes were pushed, although for some reason I thought I had them on 2 different lines. Anyway, my repository has been created. I've been able to make a change remotely and push it to my Git server. The last thing I'm going to show you on here today is how I use this as an archiving tool. So I've got the GitHub here for Heroic Games Launcher, and if you've never checked out Heroic Games Launcher, I highly recommend it. It works on Linux, Windows, and Mac OS as far as I'm aware. In order to archive this, I'm just going to grab the URL to clipboard here. I'm going to switch back to Gitea, and I'm going to create a new migration this time. I'm going to select Git. I'm going to paste that URL in here. And then I'm going to select this as a mirror. And then I'm going to migrate the repository. That took a couple minutes, but it copied the repository from GitHub. And if I go to settings, you can see under mirror settings, this is going to clone from that URL every 8 hours. So it's going to keep that local repository up to date. And if the remote repository disappears for whatever reason, I still have access to it here. So with that, Gitea is set up, and I'm ready to use it as my local Git repository and archiving tool. That's kind of how I'm going to leave it for today. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next one.